Welcome to Being Human. I'm your host, Richard Atherton, Fin Goulding, CIO and CTO at Aviva, and co-author of the book Flow. Welcome to the show.
Great. Hi. Nice to be here.
No, it's a privilege to have you on the show. I saw some of your posts on LinkedIn initially and was intrigued. Here's somebody thinking about what's past Agile, what do we get to after the Agile conversation. Then read your book. I'm now delighted to the book that you co-authored. Now delighted to have you on the show, and I thought we'd start there with Flow and talk a little bit about the genesis of that book and some of its main messages, and we can dive into it.
Okay. I mean, for me, the book is a way of sharing some of the experiences that I've had in my career. I kind of came to this whole world of Agile, and I know that you've had some people on the show before talking about Agile in terms from a technology perspective. I just thought some of those ways of working were really quite special and interesting and could be used in a wider context. And as you start to involve more people in these ways of working, you start to uncover cultural issues and perhaps challenges in getting people to let go of the ways they've done things in the past. And I try to unlock that potential and show how fun it can be in this sort of new world. So, and what's happened is that I've been involved in digital transformation or just big projects. And nothing has sort of been more powerful to me than just getting people much more into a social interaction, working together, and freed from some of the old methods. And that's kind of where the book came from, and I wrote it with Hayden, the co-author. He visited me in Paddy Power. I was working in Paddy Power at the time, saw the ways that we were working, thought this would really be a great book. And so that's how we got together and did it. So.
Right, okay. And for our international audience then, so Paddy Power is a big gambling, is that right?
Online gambling company, yes. Not a gambler myself, but I'd had this period of about 10 to 12 years where I worked all in .coms and bringing those on a journey of scale. And that was one of those businesses I worked at. And it kind of came from my days at lastminute.com, Travelocity.com, a number of .coms that get to that point where they need help to get to the next level. And that's generally around scaling systems or scaling teams or scaling people to be able to do the big jobs. And so it was quite good fun there, but we were doing something quite innovative in terms of software releases, 50 a day and stuff like that, which had been unheard of. And Hayden's an expert in innovation and working with large companies, and found me and brought a bank along to see what we were doing. And the bank were like, we do releases maybe twice a year, not so many per day. How do you do it? And that's where the conversation sort of like blossomed.
Wow, right. Yeah, because and something I think you mentioned it in the book, is it Amazon every 11 seconds?
Yeah, and it's probably out of date even now. And there are other companies that are going even faster. And if you read some of the latest DevOps reports, there are companies delivering software much quicker than that. But it's more about getting your products to market quickly. And that was the thing at lastminute.com. It was, if you were second, you'd lost. So it was all about getting out there as fast as possible with new innovation.
Right. And lastminute.com, again, for international listeners or maybe just young listeners, was a startup. But one of the big sort of poster child startups in the UK scene, right? And travel firm for last minute bookings.
Yeah, it's true. It was a pivotal moment for me because I've been working the first part of my career in banking and finance, big companies in different parts of the world as well. In fact, I was working at Visa in San Francisco. I came back to work in a .com, and I had to have my suit surgically removed and change the way that I actually interacted with people. It was great for me. I mean, literally, I had developers that didn't wear shoes, and if I went to lunch, I'd come back and there'd be two people sitting at my desk. It was that kind of like intensive environment that we worked in, and great fun. It really was good fun.
Right. That was in the centre of London, right? Were you working at the last minute offices in London?
Yeah. But we'd been on a trail of acquisition. So there was lots of work to be done across Europe with lots of businesses that were bought by the organization and actually integrating them in, which was good fun, but predominantly from the UK.
Right. And this point about the fact that we're now developing these online systems where we're updating them so rapidly, that's the need for that, or perhaps it's a sort of convergent phenomenon where we've got this need to be highly responsive in terms of these platforms, and we're changing culture inside companies at the same time. Is that at the heart of the book? Am I right? Is that?
I'd say that's part of it.
Part of it.
Yeah, I'd say that the big thing here is to look at the way that people have been using agile techniques in the past. In fact, it's sometimes seen as agile with a big A, which is like a product or a methodology or something that you buy. And the founding fathers of that kind of way of working said, hang on, this is not quite right. What we want to do is get back to being agile with a small a, and not being forced down a particular path. So within the book, we kind of say using visualizations or transparent ways of working, getting people to collaborate a lot more, work together. You don't need to follow these rigid methodologies. You can have a kind of framework that shows how to do some of this stuff and actually have some fun along the way and inject fun back into the whole process. That's kind of what we've been doing.
Right. Which reminds me, so we had Kent Beck on the show a few back, who, for those who don't know him, he was the authors of Extreme Programming, which was one of the early, I suppose, expressions of these ideas associated with Agile, and his sadness at seeing how it's evolved.
A number of people have said the same thing, and it's a shame because it certainly is a great way of working. It just kind of got a bit stuck, and I've been very controversial saying Agile is dead and getting out there and doing presentations and being provocative. But it was just to get people to think that we should move on and perhaps find a new way of working that is much more collaborative and less prescriptive.
Right. So you've met, and this is what you've described in the book Flow, where you and Hayden have described. So you mentioned visualization, you mentioned injecting fun. What are the other key aspects here?
Yeah, it's kind of like great social interaction. It's trying to get away from very hierarchical ways of working in terms of organizational structure, etc., and get people to see if they can actually. Oh, there's people next door having some fun already. There you go. They're probably having visualization right now as I speak. That's the problem with our office, by the way. When you walk around it, it's just really buzzing with people standing at walls, and discussing projects, working together. So laughter is a major part of it. But yeah, we talk about what's the best way for leaders to change in terms of being part of the team, not actually necessarily on top or driving the team, and what's their part to play, which is to keep things moving within the team. So it's to keep blockers removed and actually if there's people required, bring them in and try and get a way of making sure there's no blockages or stops in the way that we do things. So it's when you look at the way that people build systems today, or even work in general, there's the part where you wait for somebody else to help you. Well, why not have that person in the team? Why not have that part of your group? So try and find a way of doing that. We find leaders can do that. They have the ability to pull in the people that's required at the appropriate times. But again, it's a different way of working because a lot of leaders are not used to coming out of their offices and being in a stand-up situation, a meeting where you're collaborating together and you yourself are picking up actions, not necessarily giving them to everybody, which tends to be the way it works in some companies.
Right. And is that, so in terms of your journey from that suited banker into these startup environments and now what you're developing at Aviva, what have been the biggest changes for you personally in terms of how you had to change?
Yeah, I think as you go from large enterprise to startups, and then you see startups scale, and then you become, you get back into large enterprises again, is how do you get some of these ways of working adopted? And that's through, obviously, some of your history provides a backdrop to why people should do it. But at the same time, it's, can you pick a lighthouse project, something small enough to show people, look, before we did this, this is what was happening. Now we've improved this, and this is now where we are. And build a kind of community of people that are like-minded to start doing the same sort of things. For instance, in IT, it's kind of normal to put visualizations on the wall and have post-it notes and show that work items are progressing. It's not so usual in business departments or non-IT, should I say. But now I see them everywhere. So I walk past a wall where people are using it to visualize their work. It's got nothing to do with software development. It's just a way of them saying, right, these are the things we have to do. These are the things we're doing, and we can't do everything. So what's the priority? And these are the things we're done, which we're quite proud of. And it starts from there, really.
Right. And this idea of the wall, the visual wall, is central in the book. And one thought that crossed my mind was, well, okay, it's great we put all of our work on the wall, but is there a risk that some of the same patterns of behavior persist, and managers just use it as another tool for control, and actually it doesn't achieve the result you're looking for?
I think there's a little bit of that, but I believe there is the teams themselves in our situation, agree on the onset of a way of working, and we try and have a position whereby there is no, shall we say, leader, as it were. We're all leaders in a way. You have to be cognizant of the dominating personalities, that's for sure. But as a leader myself, my job is to bring people into the conversation, and these are very bright people I work with, and this is, maybe sometimes the skills are not always that come to the fore. I have to make sure that everyone gets a voice. But using the techniques, what we do is we tend to go back right to the customer and start looking at what's the most valuable things that we should be working on. Does our work fit the people that we serve, which is our customers? So if you're making sure that value from a customer segmentation perspective is correct in the first part, then it comes into the visualization of all the projects. You kind of cut down a lot of, say, irritant projects or pet projects or things that shouldn't really be there, which kind of frustrate people. That's what causes some of the friction in the first place, I find. When you can see what we're doing is really valuable for customers, I think it energizes people, and sometimes you're right, the leaders do have to back off a little bit, and they do once they see the collaboration working real time.
Right. Yeah, that reminds me, in the book you talk about it, I think with one client, banking client, you visualize all of their projects on a massive wall, and they could just visualize just how many of these projects were inappropriate or not needed.
Yeah, I did it recently as well, and because what I tend to do is try and help other companies as well, just to use these techniques, and kind of stood back and said, wow, we're going to need a bigger wall. It was that kind of thing. And by color coding the actual the projects themselves, putting them into a color coordination, which is to say, right, everything that's yellow is a strategic thing that we're doing, and everything kind of like red would be infrastructure or regulatory. There are ways of visualizing the different types of work you're doing. You can quite quickly see, we're not really doing much work for the customer. We're doing a lot of work for us internally. And is that the right thing to do? So it allows you to make decisions at a real visual level, which you don't normally see inside big, thick tomes of project reports, etc.
All right. Yeah. And what the other thought it brought to mind was that Ed Sheehan, this idea about culture, and part of it being your physical architecture, and the rules you have about how you use your physical space. And he talked about how big bags, and they'll put this great art on the wall, but they won't let the teams use the space. And those very large organizations, and the walls feel beautiful, right? And you wouldn't want to sully it with a post-it.
Yeah, we have the same thing. We see walls that are that wonderful old brickwork that's been preserved because we're trying to get this edgy industrial style office, and post-it notes don't stick them, they fall off, The first thing I do when I join a company is I go look for the facilities manager and just say, look, you're going to hate me, but we're going to be covering these walls. And to be honest with you, we've come up with some creative ideas where we use some white plastic that sticks to the wall, or we're using special paint that can be wiped down in case you need to. So you kind of get there. But you're right, it is something that it takes a bit of getting used to. But we've basically run out of wall space, and now we use boards on wheels. We come up with all sorts of creative ideas. I saw one office where they were hanging glass panels between the desks to use those to put their stickies on. I think it's a better way of working, to be honest with you, than being an individual sitting, on your own and pulled into formal meetings. This is, for me, much more fun. And so I go to maybe 4 or 5 stand-up type meetings per day, quite wide range of subjects. I'll also sneak into ones which I'm not invited to, just to see how they're getting on, you know, and just give some advice every now and again. I'm sure they don't like it. I like to see what's going on. And when I first did this as well, CEO was pretty skeptical at one company, but we found him going around at night looking at all the work that was in progress and actually started taking things off the wall. Well, why are we doing that? And why are we doing that? It's kind of interesting once you do it that way.
Right. I remember I did it once with a client, and we put a big roller whiteboard up, and the first few days that we left it up, we started to get graffiti. Like abuse, you know, effing consultants, and you're all cloned, you know, just and we were having to wipe off the graffiti like every morning as a ritual. Like, Richard, get this thing, you know, down. And I was like, no, stay with it. And after I don't know, a week, the sort of graffiti stopped, and it helped to open a conversation and some dialogue.
Yeah, I mean, I've never experienced something like that before, but I must admit, I have seen some creative ideas where I didn't think it would work, but we had one wall which was all white at Paddy Power, you know, in my gambling days, and actually that wall itself no one used it, but then we painted it green, which was the kind of color of the company, right. And everyone started using it. So I don't know, maybe there's something in this as well, and some subliminal or psychological thing to do with color, but I don't know.
Right. I've also heard about if you get creative with your visualizations and use like metaphors that resonate. So I had somebody working with, I think it was Heathrow Airport, and they styled their board as runways.
Yeah.
Because that was obviously a metaphor and I think the runways represented streams of work, whatever it might be. And that was a metaphor that resonated in the culture, right? So I think there's something about how you visualize as well.
Yeah, because we don't restrict it to IT types of working. I try and avoid some of the jargon. You can't avoid it, but you know, for some of the technical people watching this, you know, we tend to use a Kanban technique, which comes from manufacturing. But in fact, there are other visualizations that we use to get people started, and that can be using a wall just to say thank you to each other. So a thank you wall, big wall. You come along, you thank somebody for helping you. Take a picture of that once every couple of weeks, clear it down, start again. It's amazing how a little thing like that, you know, where you've got a bit of gratitude between team members that's visible and other people can see it, causes a change in the way that teams work. And then we have other walls which are related to irritations or frustrations in the workplace. So we ripped off this idea from Top Gear called the cool wall. And we have a wall whereby people put on that, you know, things that they're very happy about and things they want us to invest in, etc., or things that they're very unhappy about. And again, it doesn't always tend to be technical things. It can be, right, it's really uncool that the showers are cold in the morning, so it's very irritating. So if we fix that, people are a little bit happier. In fact, we had at another company, people were really unhappy about the cracked cups. So, you know, you would never get these things brought to the fore if you never had these ways of doing it. So we've got new cups, people were much happier.
Right, and somebody might write something like that, I don't know, in their annual employee survey. But, you know, when your comment 379 buried in some spreadsheet somewhere, what's the chances of that kind of raising up to people's consciousness and getting fixed? But I think by making it a fixture in the physical space.
Yeah. No, exactly. Like team temperature is something, or team happiness. That some companies do that. We have some teams doing that. So they have a thermometer. They put their little smiley faces on where they feel at the moment. And so if you go past and you see that team doesn't look very happy, you can go and find out why. You know, and you're not waiting for a project to start going off course. You know, a month later, discover they weren't happy because they were under-resourced or something. So, you know, there are great things like that. But to your point about making stuff visible, I did once put into a big portfolio report, you know, when you get to page 52 and you read this message, call this number to claim 500 euros. It was my number. And I sat down with the execs on the Monday morning. So did everybody read the report? Yeah. Do we take it as read? Yeah. You didn't see that page 50. No, I didn't see that. So that's why we visualize stuff. Because you just don't have the time as an exec anymore to consume all this data and make decisions. You can only look at the very small priorities at the top.
Right. And the question, which I know a bunch of people are going to have, is like, okay, this is all very well if I'm co-located in a physical space. What about if we're remote, right?
About what? Sorry,
what about if we're remote? What about if we're a remote team? How do we handle it?
Yeah, I get that all the time, and I have a couple of answers. I mean, obviously, it's preferable if you're all in the same place. I mean, a lot of these ideas come from startups or an entrepreneur environment where you are all together. It wouldn't be unusual at lastminute.com for the CEO to be testing a release, because you're all, and it's a big company, right? But everybody's like getting ready to get something delivered, and it's all hands to the pump. But when you start to work in remote teams, if you can give the remote team end-to-end responsibility, so from start to finish, so that they are not dependent on anybody in another group, then you can get the same fluidity. If you're going to have a remote team, try and make it 2 centers max. Any more than that, and you can't really do it. And so we have really big screens that we use, which are always on, and we're able to have really, really good stand-up meetings with a remote team. But by and large, we try and minimize or eradicate it completely. So just give that remote team the power to go from an idea to production. It's a bit of a leap of faith for some companies, but believe me, you can see the actual cycle and how it actually moves quite quickly when you do that.
Right, and that's very different from my experience of remote teams. And often it's the low cost center that's remote, and so the lower value in quotes activities, and maybe if people think it this way, the testing is done there, and but the architects and maybe some of the key developers are in another place, and it's rare that remote team, as you say, is given full autonomy.
It's a difficult thing to do, and that is a big cultural shift, I think, if you're going to have those types of teams. Now, in my career, I was lucky enough when lastminute.com was bought by the same company that owned Travelocity, which was Sabre, and they allowed me to go and run an offshore center in Argentina. So I did that for 3 years. So I was on the other end of this, providing the services. And I just discovered the teams that had the autonomy to go from product development to production were the happiest teams and most productive teams. In fact, they used to do their releases from each other's homes once every Friday or so and have a barbecue afterwards. Very Argentinian thing to do. And the team camaraderie and spirit was fantastic. The teams where they were 1 or 2 people connected to a remote team were less happy and had more issues because they weren't part of that team per se, or they got visited once a year or something. So I was a big champion for making the teams holistic and hybrid teams. And that was way back like 2009, 2010. And that's why I just discovered this DevOps thing, which is, development operations coming together in one team. And I thought back then, wow, what if there were more people in this team? So that expression, DevOps, is kind of techie and it's quite de rigueur at the moment. But so we came up with the idea of flow teams. So, well, how can this team flow best? And generally it's when everybody's together. And so even in remote teams, it can be done, but you kind of have to give some control back. And that's the big thing, is the control element.
Yeah, that's what people bristle against.
Yeah, a little bit.
Okay. But I suppose it helped with you as well, having somebody very trusted within the company. You went out to Argentina, right? And presumably made a difference in terms of the trust, did it?
Yeah, well, in reality, the teams that I was working with were very much connected to the .coms that the organization had bought, and the fragmented teams were not. They were traditional teams that were part of the larger organization where they were working on some of the older systems. So it was just the ability to do things quickly all together is easier to prove when you're doing digital development. It's a little bit harder when you're doing some of the big mainframe work where you have a need for specialisms.
Right. Yeah. Well, and that touches actually on something. You talk about fungible roles. I heard that term used in anything other than currency before, but talk about what you mean by fungible.
Well, there's a bit of a movement going on. I think I'm part of it as well. I'm being provocative again. I call this sort of stuff HR 2.0 or people functions reinvented. But, we have job descriptions, and those job descriptions can be quite narrow for individuals. And as I say, like at lastminute.com, I saw the CEO testing. I'd see developers that would be perhaps, creating databases, and I'd see other people doing something outside of their job roles. And it always occurred to me, why is it like that? And as you see the world changing, where there's no real job for life anymore, and people are changing trades. For instance, they have one profession or one particular specialism at university, then they learn something else and become proficient in that, or they change again midway through their careers. So it's possible. So I came up with this theory, well, why is the job description so limiting? And so can you have maybe a specialist skill and a broad skill, or two specialist skills and a broad skill, or three specialist skills and a broad skill? So kind of, this kind of idea of having T-shaped, pie-shaped, or cone-shaped was something I'd seen. I thought, this is great. And it just said to me that people can be much more fungible if you allow them to be, because quite often you get, well, I'm not doing that, or I can't do this because that person's not here to do it for me. And some of our processes and methods have actually restricted us to be able to do things because of delineation of responsibility, or something that's grown up over the years because one person did something bad, everybody else has to suffer for that. So I'm kind of becoming a bit of a champion for how can we get broader, more meaningful, rich roles. And it's not easy because, think about everything that's based upon it. Compensation's based upon it, promotions, etc. I think over time, some of these things will start to be challenged, and we'll start to move back towards teams rather than total individual focus.
But okay, so there's a paradox there, because you're saying it's about the team, but then you also want to say, actually, this individual can do anything. So
yeah, generally I'd see it doing it for the team. So if I still had my coding skills, I would love to do that for the team if they were under pressure, but probably not allowed to. And I kind of say why, or are there people in the team that can help each other out? And in a little way, in DevOps, they kind of do that. The developers will help the operations staff under pressure, and vice versa. It's just saying, can we do that on a broader level? And it's kind of utopia. It's a great vision to have, but I think by being provocative around this, people are starting to say, maybe there's something in here about broadening roles and making them more fun.
Right. Reminds me a bit of that. Have you done any of the reading on Valve?
No, I haven't. No.
So Valve is a gaming company, and they've got the famous Valve handbook, and that they come from that philosophy as well, right? You're not given a formal job title. There is no. The only time they use job titles, apparently, so the book says, is when they need to face off to the market, right? And then they create a role to make themselves understandable to customers or to the market. But internally, that's not currency. Right. And the way that they're compensated is based on a peer review of their contribution to the team or to the company.
Okay. Didn't quite have that at lastminute.com, but we did have a situation where you could have whatever job description you wanted, or title that you wanted. So we had somebody in charge of innovation. She was great, and her title was Mother of Innovation, which I thought was a great thing. So to have Mother of Innovation on your business card certainly made people think, what's this company all about? But there are some of those roles. I'd like to just see that we are just a little bit more broader and not so narrow, just to help out, I say, cover the edges between different people in the team.
Yeah. So, but as my mind's turning here as well, as I think about Mother of Innovation, and that's very much allowing the individual to express themselves fully and give themselves an identity that most best fits. And we're also talking about having team identities. And making them both important, right? Is it?
Yeah, I think that where we're finding where the team gathers inspiration, has fun, is in their purpose and what they're actually doing. So if they're doing stuff for customers and they're interacting really with customers, bringing customers in off the street to meet with the teams, and you see that direct impact, it makes it much more fun. Some organizations allow the teams to share in the profit and loss of the particular thing they're working on, which is another way of working, or a gamification, teams against teams. I'm not so sure about that, but there are different ways of inspiring the teams. But I always talk to people that sometimes they're a little bit skeptical of some of the things I talk about. So, well, when was the last time you came to work and were happy, that you really felt energized? You came in the door and went, fantastic, I'm really looking forward to today. Or did you just come and think, oh my God, I can't wait till Friday, And that's the thing, I think, when you work in a great environment where you have some of these techniques, that you can address some of that. Not everything, but you can address quite a lot of it.
Right. Yeah, this is fascinating, because the last guy I interviewed, a guy called Jack Hubbard, I mentioned before we came on, I interviewed him from his treehouse out in the Alps in France, and he's at his company, Propellernet, he's developed something called the Dream Incubator, or the Dream Machine, where individuals will say what their dream is, what do they want to become, what do they want to do in the world, and it's not necessarily within the company, it's just what they want to do in the world, and then the company will see how they can facilitate that. And if they can facilitate that within the company, great. And if not, then they may well help them do that outside of the company. And a couple of product ideas have emerged out of that process, which have become extremely profitable for the company. So,
wow, I love that. That's great. I think where the challenge comes is trying to do some of this stuff within a large enterprise. So, the challenge for me in smaller companies was not as great, because there's a lot of people saying, well, yeah, we already do some of this, or, let me show you what I've been doing. In large companies, it's starting to get into the fabric because of the need to be aware of disruption, or in fact, in our organization, our CEO talks about disrupting ourselves, collaborating with startups or accelerating them. Bringing them into our value chain, that kind of stuff. And I find all that really quite heartening, whereas at some point, if you are a large, stuffy organization that don't adopt some of the techniques or look outside, you're exploiting your current business model. At some point, you're going to be, wiped out if you're not careful. So it's a different driver, but it is interesting.
Right. One of the things you talked about was tiger teams versus flow teams, right? And I thought that was right. There's a diagram in the book, and I thought that was just interesting to paint a picture of the difference in terms of what you're talking about with flow. Could you touch on that?
It's kind of evolving as well. Whereas sometimes putting teams together just to fix something, it can work. That's something that organizations do. But what I'm finding with flow teams is that bringing in more roles from different parts of the organization, making it a little bit more persistent in the way that it works, because that persistency is something that you don't always get. You kind of get teams that are formed, broken up, put back together again, and try and prevent some of that. So I've seen in the DevOps world, they're talking about DevOps 2.0, which is to include, say, for instance, business analysis or security or other roles. We were already thinking about this from a flow perspective quite some time ago. And teams that are set up where there's no inefficient handoffs are far happier and more productive than the ones that have to wait for somebody else to do something for them.
Right. And the other thing, so it's this idea of incorporating a broader scope to allow them to become more autonomous and happier. And we know that, right? I mean, there's quite a lot of psychological research that suggests that the greatest degree to which we're in charge of our own destiny and actions, the happier we are. But you also talk about this idea of uncertainty orientation versus orientation towards goals. And could you expand on that a little bit? Because
I think there's, I think Hayden puts this really well. It's sometimes you just need a compass, to go in a certain direction, not necessarily this kind of prescribed set of goals and objectives. I mean, they are important, but the more narrow they are, the more you're likely to go down a particular path and maybe start delivering something way too early for it being, for it to be valuable, shall we say, or you're actually creating something that nobody wants. So the theory being that if you're a little bit more comfortable with some ambiguity, if you're comfortable with test and learn and trying some stuff out, if you're comfortable with, as you say, with the team coming up with ideas and say, well, let's go with it, rather than actually say, well, actually, that's not in our objectives, that's not in our goals, and pushing it to one side, you're stifling innovation somewhat. So we are big fans of the kind of test learn techniques rather than, building stuff before you start to learn from it. And one of the things we've been looking at is even faster, getting to market rather than minimal viable product. Lots of people talk about MVP has become quite famous, right? We're thinking in terms of what's the minimum thing that you can sustain in terms of delivery to get that feedback, to see what it is. And that can sometimes just be even simpler than a prototype. It could even just be a picture, or an idea or something. And so it's trying to bring that stuff to the fore. And therefore, for us, it's trying to get teams, that are more empowered and less constrained. And for us, sometimes to be able to do something that's probably not, written on the tin, shall we say.
Right. Yeah. I like this. I like that. I like that metaphor of using a compass. And
it's great. I can't use that. I must admit, he used that. I've stolen it now, but I'll use it from now on. But it's what we're finding in some of these methodologies is they're very prescriptive. They take you down a certain way of working, and we see people with roles that are appropriate to that methodology, etc. And our idea was to be, well, can we just be a bit more fluid? Can we actually have more of a framework rather than a true methodology, more of a philosophy of a way of working? Now, some people find that a bit too woolly, and some people even challenged me to say frameworks are too rigid. It should be wider than that. But it's having a customer innovation mindset that works with a very efficient delivery mindset. And those are the things that we've been homing in on in the book. In fact, as we wrote the first book, we then wrote a second book because we had so much material and so many new ways of working and ideas. And then now working on another one. So it's constantly changing. Whereas we found that some of these other ways of working are written in stone and you follow them. There are certain versions that you must be compliant with. And we're thinking this is all nuts, just like use some of the techniques, empower people and have some fun.
Right. It reminds me of what Dan North said on the podcast, that I think the Scrum handbook is they've changed one word in 20 years or something.
It might be a little bit harsh, I think, but we're trying to get them to come on this journey with us, those foundations, those groups, and to let go of the comfort blanket a little bit. And because once you move some of these techniques, it's like, as you say, Scrum and technical agility, into a wider business agility world, your market, is even bigger. It's massive in terms of organizations wanting to go on this journey. And for us, it's like, how do we teach people some of the skills enough for them to be able to be effective in their organizations? But once you start to use these things, you kind of find it much more natural, than following a guidebook that somebody else wrote 10 years ago, which probably is not so appropriate for today's business world. So I'm a big fan of business agility. But to your point, I think we've kind of been talking about it in a way, is that it's the big cultural transformation that's required in companies to give people freedom to do this, or it's not so much empowerment anymore. That's kind of probably worn out word. In fact, that sometimes is very negative. Yeah, sure, I'm going to empower you to deliver this particular product. If it screws up, well, then goodbye, thanks. That's not so powerful at all. But just giving people the ability to have their voices heard and get some time to test some of these ideas in the real world.
Right. You certainly in Flow, you dedicated an entire section to leadership, and first you and a lot of our mission is around developing leadership in the workplace. What's your take on the key aspects of leadership for Flow?
It keeps modifying, I must say. So, for me, I kind of think that leaders need to get out of the way sometimes, and just really remove the blockages and irritants that teams face. There's a movement towards servant leadership, so that the leader is serving the entire team. So turning that triangle of hierarchy the other way around. I'm feeling it's more that the leader is part of the team and has a certain set of skills which might be appropriate for making the team successful. So it's kind of a change in the way that it works. So I'm finding I spend most of my time coaching or mentoring, sometimes counseling. These are skills that I think are not appropriately used by many leaders or managers. In fact, they get them quite late. some people become leaders or managers just because they've got to a certain level. You know, I'm an IT guy. I love technology, and I think I only went up the tree because it was a way of escalating up and getting more money. You know, I think these days there's much more value associated with people that bring some of those skills, which are not necessarily managing a team of 100, but it's influencing a team of thousands, you know, and that's, for me, is even more powerful leadership. So I think, yeah, we've been talking about how to reinvent all of that, you know, and get away from some of the command and control structures, which tend to suck the energy of the company to the top of the pyramid and not push that energy out to customers. So that's hard. Let me tell you, that really is hard. You can only do that, I think, potentially by example, where you've got, you know, the feedback from teams and what you're producing is valuable to the organization as well. But yeah, leadership is it's coming under pressure. I think it needs to change.
Right. And so when you say it's hard, this pushing of the energy towards the customer, is that the part that's hard?
No, it's getting the leaders to change to these ways of working, you know, to become more collaborative themselves, to join the stand-ups, to get out of formal meetings, to get away from the heavy tome of information that's required, you know, these reports, etc., that people don't always read. And I've found it quite inspirational. Some teams now, even from a risk management point of view, we've got some teams that, you know, their record of this particular meeting is a photograph of a wall, which I just think is just brilliant. You know, that for me is like highly nimble. But, you know, there are others saying, hang on, there's an appropriate audit trail or whatever. You know, there's always somebody that's saying, is this the right way of doing it? We've always done it another way, and we should always do it that way. And I think the more progressive leaders are challenging that and saying, no, I think this is the right way to go, and bringing the team on that journey with us. But it's that cultural thing within an organization. And I'm seeing it in a lot of places where it is definitely changing. People are starting to question the old paradigms.
And when you find yourself in that position, let's take the example you just used of somebody demanding an audit trail. What do you rely on to manage that conversation?
A little bit of charm, you know, a little bit of humor. It is that, you know, it's being very open and listening to what the concerns are and saying, let's try this. Let's try a different way of doing this. Let's see if we can prove that it's an easier way of working. And generally, you know, it is. Sometimes I'm wrong, and that's okay. So we'll have to do it a different way. Yeah, we are a highly regulated business, and lots of the businesses I've worked in have been highly regulated. So you kind of have to do some things in a certain way. But I think it was the chief operating officer of Ryanair once said to me, you know, what you should do is really comply with the regulations which make sense, and really challenge the ones that don't, because they're the ones that have been around for a long time, and people can't even remember why they're there, and they are not in the customer's best interest at times, and that's what you have to be thinking about.
Right. And do you have any examples of where you've tried that and failed? You know, you challenged and it's gone wrong and you've learned something.
I'm not going to share that with you. I've tried a few things. Like I've tried to change PMOs, project management officers, to call them value management officers, you know, to get them to focus on value. They don't like that at all. I've tried to change people's job descriptions, you know, from, say, Scrum Master to something else, and that's gone down badly. Or bringing teams together into a DevOps structure. You know, when you start to touch the things that people hold dear, what I've learned through my career is that requires much more consultation, collaboration, and kind of co-design. You know, so if you're the leader saying, "Great news, we're going to abolish all your job descriptions," they kind of see their value in the marketplace places completely gone. So it's not a great thing. So you have to, but to your point, maybe there's a name you have externally and what you have internally are different things, you know. So there's probably a way around it. But yeah, I'm quite often I've been quite close to having challenges from me go completely wrong, and I think I'm big enough to accept that, you know. So I've got at the point in my career where it's like, okay, sometimes I can be wrong.
Yeah, and I do find, having played that role of change agent myself, is that for me at least, it sort of tended to come with the territory where I've pushed made a suggestion and then had my fingers burnt. You mentioned that praise wall. I had the situation with a client, I think I've shared this on the show before, where I suggested it's something very similar, right? A wall where people put praise cards, praising other team members, and tried it a few times and sort of pushed, and then tried it in this one stand up, and she said, "F off with your hippie shit," right in front of the rest. Slap her. And I learned that, I hadn't, to your point, I hadn't listened, I hadn't really understood where she was at.
Yeah.
And as a result of that, misjudged the situation. And that idea eventually came back in a very British way. We had this sort of post box where we could put our praise into a post box, and then it would go
nice.
to the person.
It's a start, isn't it? Sometimes it's a start. Yeah. I think sometimes you have to go and try a little bit of this, or sometimes you say, look, let's give it a go for a little while and see what happens. But yeah, it's the complexity of people and how you unlock their potential has always been one of those things that's fascinated me, and how to work alongside. But I do find that the visualization and transparency way of working is far more successful than the old-fashioned negotiating across a table, or arm wrestling around a certain things. Maybe you're arguing something because of your position, which is not great. We should be arguing about something because it's a value to the team or the way of working. It's a different way of thinking about it. But yeah, it is one of those things, because if you see the book, we do have the title that includes the word maverick, and that sometimes I get called that, which can be a double-edged thing, can be good and bad, because some people don't like the status quo being challenged, I kind of like it. Maybe I'm at the point in my career where that works for me, but maybe if I was younger, I'd probably find it more difficult. But part of it's having the sort of like the will and the gumption to try this stuff, and I would never go back. I mean, I just prefer this way of working. For me, it's great. Like for instance, my leadership meeting is 15 minutes per day. So that's it. That's all we do. We don't have monthly meetings. We don't have big, reports that no one reads. We don't listen to a diatribe of someone talking about something that, is great to them, but is not maybe relevant to everybody else. It's very focused. It's very like, what are we doing? What's done? What's next to be done? And it's very much in the moment, and it's based around people and our innovation, our delivery, all the key things that we have to do as a group. And I actually find that really good fun.
Wow. Yeah, that's I can imagine how liberating that is, and all the stage management that goes into those monthly meetings, right?
Yeah, we don't have any of that. This is all post-it notes. It's quite an ugly looking board, actually. I shared it with someone the other day. I got a friend who's moved to Australia who asked me to send a picture, which I did, so you could see how it works. But that's, we don't need the airs and graces and the fancy fonts and binded folders and all that kind of stuff. That's really, really inefficient way of working. As to your point around change, it's like, I think that's one of the criticisms I've had in the past is I love change. I mean, I tend to come to the office a different route every day. I try and find a different way of walking to the office every day. I just think something about change for me is brilliant. But then there are a lot of people that don't like it. So it's how do you get them on the same journey as you? That's one of the biggest challenges. And sometimes you have to be a little bit more patient.
Patience, yeah. I think that's a big skill in the army of the change agents. Yeah.
It is, yeah. I find that as well. But also, once you do get people into this way of working, you then have another ambassador who then teaches somebody else, and then it becomes kind of, electric. It goes viral.
Yeah, no, I've experienced that. You reach some kind of a tipping point where enough influential people buy it, right?
Yeah, and in fact, they start using it themselves, or I'll go past a team and they've created a new wall. Where the hell did that come from? I'd never seen that before. Or a new variant of one of the walls that we have. So one I saw the other day has a history of all the things that have blocked that team in the past on the wall, so that new team members can learn. These are the things that can actually trip you up or stop you. I'd never seen that before, and had all of these solutions associated with it. So that'll probably be coming to a book near you quite soon, that visualization, living vicariously of other people's skills. But it's great to see that kind of thing is done like that. And even like you talked about staff satisfaction, even that team that's responsible for working with all the other teams visualize all the initiatives that come from the surveys and focus the teams to prioritize on that in a visual way. It's like brilliant. I mean, that was never designed or came up by me. It was just people thought this is a good way of doing it. We've seen those other guys doing it.
Is there ever a time when you find that you found that you couldn't visualize? Like I had an example where we were able to put a lot of work up on the wall, but when it came to org structure and we were starting to look at role definitions and so on, so that was something, we could put everything else on the wall, but that's a bit too sensitive. Did you ever encounter anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, you have to be sensitive, I guess. I mean, we do on some of our walls have stuff. In fact, on the wall right now, there is a ticket that says org structure, because we're making some changes to the way that we're operating to make us more efficient. So it's not hidden away; people can see it. But there are techniques you can use. I mean, you can use project names, if you want to. And we did that quite frequently in a previous life where we had a new product that we're developing and launching. We didn't want to call it what it was, so we used a different name for it. So, and also on the the post-its you put on the walls, we mostly use reusable cards, are becoming more popular now. But you can put the sensitive information on the back, so you can't see that. So now that's really to stop visitors seeing what's on your wall. So they see the front, they're not allowed to look at the back. But I think if you can't really make things as transparent, 100%, it's a bit of a shame, really. I know there are some things, that's for sure, but it should be really minimal. It should be stuff that's really quite sensitive. But try not to do that at all. And I'm always willing to answer questions if people see stuff on my wall. I'll happily tell them what it is. It's not an issue for me. But it is a challenge for some teams. And so we're just trying to find different ways around that.
Right. The other thing you mentioned when you talked about leadership was this idea of being possibility oriented versus probability oriented. And expand on that.
Oh, that's a difficult one to talk about. I mean, are you looking at the future, or are you actually obsessing over things that might go wrong? And that tends to be part of the mindsets, and therefore trying to get people to be more on the positive side than the negative side. And I know you need people that are going to say, hang on, we shouldn't go down that route, we shouldn't do that, but a lot of the great innovative ideas or products, they didn't come from overanalyzing what could go wrong. They just went out and started testing and trying to see how things would work, or they pivoted really quickly, which is like, okay, can we take this and take it in a different direction? What's possible with what we've got? For instance, I know, do you use Slack at all? Or a lot of people use Slack for messaging. It's quite popular, within software engineering, but it's also used a lot by teams to collaborate. It started life as the chat mechanism between online gamers. So online gamers used to use this in San Francisco, the IRC chat, as people would know it. And they actually pivoted it to this messaging platform, which is now a big business, which is now, I think it's probably going to be IPO'd soon and make gazillions. But it just came from one particular, and if they'd gone off down the route of, right, we're going to create this, one thing and stick with it, it probably would never have gone anywhere, So I just kind of find that way of working fascinating for me.
Yeah, because some guy in that, because I understand it was an internal tool, right, in this company, and some guy was like, well, hang on, why don't we make this the product? This is popular. So that possibility orientation. Yeah.
Exactly, and therefore, there's a lot of things like that where you can tweak something, or not constrain your thinking by what could go wrong and what could be a thing that holds you back.
And why do you think we don't? Because I'm just relating again to this guy I mentioned, CEO of Propellernet, and he's really had that become part of the culture. And why do you think so many companies resist that being central to the culture?
I don't know. I can't speak for a lot of experience. I've worked in lots of companies where, has been a collaborative, innovative type of way of working. Sometimes you get companies that set up an innovation team and it doesn't always work because it's out of context, or it's to be seen to be doing it on a maybe a report that goes to the city or something. But when it's part of your culture, when it's something that you do all the time, when it's the way that you start thinking about a particular product that you're going to build or a project you're going to do, if you start with the innovative mindset and what is possible, then you'll get a better outcome at the end of the day. We're always obsessed with value. What's the most valuable things to do? But you can't teach people to be innovative. That happened once in a large financial institution I worked at. You'll have to guess which one it was, many years ago, where we went on innovation training. I could not stop laughing. I mean, how can you teach me to be innovative? It's impossible, you know. But there is certainly a way of people who are working together to spark off each other and start to think about how to do things in a different way. And the visualizations really help with that. And there's a number of organizations I've seen that can help quite senior teams go on this journey. But you tend to have a lot of people saying, I don't think about, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? Have you thought, all the different blockages come up. Some are valid, but it kind of, I think it drags everything down in a way. So for me, it's not so productive when that happens.
Yeah. Personally as well, I think a part of it is this busyness obsession, right? And I think a lot of the companies where I think this conversation flourishes to a great degree actually give people space. So this other company I mentioned, they'll give people a day a week, or they'll give people space to develop their ideas. And from what I understand of the Google culture, that's also certainly was true.
I don't know if they do it anymore, and maybe it's moved on since then. But there is something what we use in the sort of like technique for software development, using this Kanban method that we have. We're able to limit the work in progress that's attributed to an individual. So we kind of say, right, an individual can only do one thing at a time. So let's not overload them with lots of things with their context switching. So I'm thinking about this the other day. Can we take that concept on a wider level? Not just an individual developer with one task, but we're saying, well, we recognize it's best for you to stay focused on one thing, build it, move on to the next thing. So we'll limit what we're going to give you. Can we do that at the value management end, the customer innovation end? Can we just say, like, we're going to go after 2 or 3 things instead of 100 things? And or once we get to a level of projects which are in our portfolio, should we really be doing like the 5 most valuable things rather than the 500 things that are on our massive wall that we've just visualized for everybody? And then using that 80-20 rule, that really 80% of the customers will use 20% of the functionality we build. So let's focus on that bit. Let's not build everything. And that tends to be what happens in large organizations that have lots of people and their job is to deliver stuff. So they deliver stuff and a lot of it. So I like this idea of limiting things in the pipeline, but I'm not sure everyone's ready for that yet, but we'll see.
Right. Yeah, that's a really important part of having that space.
Yeah, I mean, you do need time to think. And in fact, with some of our teams, that's why you see the ping pong tables and the foosball. You might think that's crazy, but if you've got a very intensive job where you're using your brain matter for 8 hours, that you do need a little time to disconnect. And one of our teams here has a Scrabble wall, so they play Scrabble against each other. So it's a break from the coding, but it's challenging each other. It's not just developers either that use that technique. But I try to think of ways that can keep you fresh and keep you moving along. And sometimes you just kind of get stuck. Perhaps you had an idea during the day and you had this eureka moment when you go home. It's because you've just relaxed a little bit. So that's why I'm a crazy runner. I get a lot of my ideas when I'm out running. So that gives me I sometimes have to stop and take a note. I need to find a better way of taking notes so I don't have to stop running. But your inspiration comes when you disconnect, say, from the daily grind.
Right. And that's around for those listening, you're in Dublin, right? So you live in Dublin itself and run around Dublin?
Yeah, live in the centre of Dublin. Been here for quite a number of years. It's probably the biggest village in Europe. It's that kind of feel about it. It's a great place. I really enjoy it. It's a great place to work.
Yeah, I've been there once. I loved it. Okay, I know you're potentially getting thrown out of your your room, right, at half
Yeah,
past.
yes. We don't no offices here, so I'm just using it's a nice meeting room actually. I thought the lights would have gone off by now, but I've been doing enough expressive stuff to keep them on, which
Right.
is but yeah, it's for me, it's the day goes on, so it'll be another set of stand-up meetings, but a bit of fun as well that's associated with that.
I wanted to touch on just two last points before you potentially get
Sure.
taken from the room. One was which I thought was interesting, and again touches a little bit on our perspective within First Human around leadership and management, and that was this idea of allowing emotions to flow. Yeah, could you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's we don't tend to do that, do we? With that sort of like the sensitive side of ourselves is not something that we bring to the workplace too often, unless we're at an extreme of anger or sadness. And like your example of putting the thank yous in a box, so it's like that's very, as you said, a very British thing, you know. And I read something the other day about, you know, when was the last time you cried in the office or something? It's probably something that you don't normally do. So we tend to have a lot of the emotional side tends to be more of the anger, the aggression, the command control type stuff. And we just have to kind of stop that, in my view, and try and get to a point where the emotions we use are much more around humor, fun. Humor's probably not emotion, but fun that's caused by things like that, by great social interaction. You know, people working together and having some fun. Even I had a very difficult meeting the other day, had everybody together, and I just started saying, but there'll be brownie points for great examples of collaboration in this meeting, you know, and just a little fun thing like that set the meeting off in the right way. And we tend to not do that, I think, in business. We tend to come up from a confrontational, hierarchical way, and that causes a lot of issues. And around, in fact, this what we're probably not addressing that much in business these days is people's mental health in the workplace. And I think you'll see more of that coming out in the future as we get more and more comfortable about talking things like about these sort of things, which do come around because of the extreme pressures or the ways that some organizations work.
Right.
I've answered your question, but it made
Yeah,
me feel.
no. I like that perspective. It's like, sounds to me like you're coming at it from a place of orientation. You know, how do we sort of nudge? I know you don't like the nudge as in nudge theory, but you know, how do we orient more towards fun and possibility, and less towards aggression and power-seeking behaviour? Would that be right?
Yeah, I think. I mean, I'm responsible for inclusion and diversity here in Ireland, and that's not just about those, you know, the obvious things around inclusion and diversity. It can be an inclusion of people's different ways of thinking and working. And so I'm always thinking of how to make that a more comfortable place for people to work, so it brings out the best in them, you know. So you quite often see people that are very, very quiet, and how do you to take that introvert out and not make them feel really bad, to make them feel very comfortable to share. And a great example is my wife. She's a Scrum Master, believe it or not, in a large bank, and she decided with her team to get better integration that every Friday they should wear the same color. There's one person that hadn't spoken in the team for almost a year until she joined. He said, "We're all going to wear yellow," and everybody looked like, "What?" All of a sudden, this person wanted to wear yellow and is now the chief color picker, you know, every week. And I think that's just fantastic, you know, and that's got nothing to do with hierarchy. It's got nothing to do with anything other than having a team-based idea.
Right. Well, that reminds me of I don't know if you've ever used the Lego serious play techniques.
No, I know of it, but I've never done it.
Right. No, I was working with a team, and we had a particular team member who just wouldn't engage with anything. You know, however we tried to make it fun, you know, she just resisted engaging. And in this exercise, you know, we had two phases where first we created individual models, and then we amalgamated the models to build a vision of what we wanted to build. And she came alive. She absolutely came alive in that exercise, you know, and she was such an integral part of the creative process. And for her, clearly, there was something about working with her hands and working with Lego, perhaps particularly, that just completely shifted her orientation and her contribution to the team. Yeah.
Fantastic.
So I think, so maybe what we're pointing to here is something about thinking creatively around engagement itself. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I went to a meetup the other day, which was around service design and user experience design, and ways that people are using those techniques outside of technology, but just in the general, like inside the city, for instance, in terms of things that they're up to. But I was fascinated by one of the speakers who teaches visual facilitation. So you've probably been to maybe a conference where someone's drawing the conference. You know, it's probably quite popular these days. But using that technique to run large meetings, and without having to be an artist yourself, teaching you some of the ways of pulling the key points out of what people are discussing, drawing it in a visual way. And you can take even the contentious thing and draw it in a fun way, so that it takes the sting out of it, you know. And so I'm really fascinated by this. And one of the things they've done in Dublin, for instance, in terms of that visualization and changing behaviors, is that we have these boxes, you know, that control the traffic lights, these green boxes everywhere. You may have seen them. And they've started painting them. And since they've started painting them with art, people have stopped putting graffiti on them. And to prove their point, they turned one back to grey, and graffiti was all back on it again. Then they changed it back to art, and there was no graffiti. There's something about visualization that I haven't fully tapped into yet, but I'm going to, and maybe that will be Hayden and I's next book around this.
It's almost like we're rediscovering it, right? I mean, it's like we've had it as this specialized activity that, you know, artists do, right? And all the rest of us kind of can't do it, or we think we can't do it.
Yeah.
And there's something happening, right, where it seems to be coming.
You're going to see visual facilitation it's going to be really big in the future. I really think it will be.
And perhaps just the use of art, you know, use of art in business, perhaps.
Yeah.
Broadly. Yeah.
I mean, I already do. I'm the one that takes the pen and draws the value stream, which is kind of like very techie, you know, or agile. But I didn't think about drawing, you know, an angry boss with steam coming out of their ears about a particular topic, and then putting what those things are. I'm sure that really does take the sting out of some of these kind of aggressive sessions that you might have. But not to say that my boss has got steam coming out of their ears, and if he's watching this, then honestly, I didn't mean you.
Right. I did it. I facilitated a retrospective once. I know you've got your views about retrospectives in the book, but so this is just a meeting where, for those who are not familiar, they come together and just talk through what's working and what isn't in the team. And we did it with Lego again, and the Scrum Master created a model of a horse. He put a horse in the middle of the model, and then he had the strings coming off the horse, and he was dragging, right, these people and these blocks. And when it was his time to share the model, he said, well, this has been my experience of the last 2 weeks. I've been, you know, just pulling the whole team. And through expressing himself with the model, this guy was not somebody who was quick to express his inner feeling. But by, as you say, just taking this thing out of it, by creating that little bit of separation and expressing it through a model, he was able to share some of his emotional content. And suddenly the whole team could feel it, right? They could, and they kind of knew the truth of it, right? In a way that wouldn't have happened if he'd just written it on a sticky.
Yeah. And now they're all in the flow, as we would say.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. And one final question. Let's hope you keep the room. Something I ask regularly to my guests. To you, what does it mean to be human?
Me, that's a really, really broad question to ask. For me, it's about belonging. I think I learned that within Argentina, where I went there, and in the office in the morning, you know, everyone kisses each other. Men as well kiss each other, and you're then welcomed into a family situation, and you're made to feel part of that. You have a value that you have to that particular family, and that's why I've got an Argentinian wife, by the way. So, and our lives are around how we interact with each other, and I kind of bring a little bit of that into the office, you know, making people feel that they belong, and that for me is being human.
Fantastic, beautiful response. Okay, thank you so much, Ben, for your time. It's been brilliant conversation, and you really brought the book to life. For people who want to check out more, if they search for Flow on Amazon?
Oh, yeah, we have a website which is flow-academy.org, or it's on Amazon. But and people can reach out to me on LinkedIn or Twitter. I try and give advice or comments or whatever, because I do think there's more to be done to bring some of these ideas out and to get them used in more situations.
Awesome, brilliant. Well, I commend you for that work. Okay, thank you so much for your time.
Great.
Enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you.
Cheers. Thank you.